us. Welcome to today's GPLH program, Intersections of Grant Writing and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I am very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Jeffrey Winthral. Jeff is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Foundation Relations at United Way of Westchester and Putnam. Jeff is a Yonkers native, with 13 years of grant writing experience for local, state, federal, and private foundations. He oversees all the grant proposal development over at United Way. Before United Way, he worked as a program evaluator, assessing educational projects, and an adjunct professor at Binghamton University's social work department, teaching research methods and program evaluation courses. While having graduated with an MA in psychology from Iona University, Jeff is a PhD candidate currently at Binghamton University's College of Community and Public Affairs. So get this, he's completing his dissertation on understanding how community navigators can assist the undocumented population during the provision of community-based resources. So I find that fascinating. In his extra time, of which I'm sure there was plenty, Jeff, he co-chairs a staff-led diversity, equity, and inclusion committee at the United Way. He's a new board member of Grant Professionals Lower Hudson, welcome, and a board director at Austining Padres Hispanos. He lives in Putnam Valley with his wife and 2 young daughters and strives to perfect his lasagna recipe, which I find great. And if you ever need any lasagna tasters, I'm sure a lot of us here today would be willing to volunteer. All right, Jeff, take us away.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. I know it's afternoon time, it's your lunchtime, so I appreciate this. And special thanks to GPLH, ADO, my lovely fellow colleagues here at the United Way, the GoJet backgrounds. This was unanticipated. I had no idea, but thank you. Appreciate the support. And a quick shout out to Maria Detruche, who helped out with some initial planning on this presentation as well. But sadly, she couldn't be here today. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and just give me the heads up if you can see it.
Not yet. Yes, we can. Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so title of this presentation, this proper presentation, obviously, is the intersection of grant writing and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And hereafter, I'm going to say DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's just like a semblance. And I don't need to name myself. Michelle did a great job doing that. So by the end of this presentation, we should have some idea in terms of the following areas. And these are what we call learning objectives. Why DEI is important in grant writing, how funders may perceive DEI in their grant making, identifying an organization's mission, resource perception, and commitment to DEI, and recognizing theory and conceptual frameworks that can be infused with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is the goal of this presentation. Hopefully it works. And if you have any questions, please save towards the end and we'll go through them. So before you even do anything, let's actually define a few terms that's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have culture, which is a biggie. And the generic definition of this could be a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, practices that characterizes an individual, institution, or a social group. And then if you look at this picture here, we have culture in the center, and then we have all these different, factors and variables that you can look at that makes up what culture is. From language to communication to customs to values, thoughts. Culture is huge. And this can help determine how diversity and inclusion looks, especially when putting together a grant proposal. We also have diversity, how people differ. This concludes, but may not be limited to race, ethnicity, creed, color, sex, gender, gender identity, and so on. And the whole goal of this is to empower individuals by respecting and appreciating for what makes everyone unique. And the point of why we're defining these terms is because we need to be able to understand and have some common language about them. This commonality. We have equity, which means fair treatment, access, opportunity, advancement for all people. And the goal here is to promote justice, in some cases, or many cases actually, social justice, and fairness within procedures, process, and distribution of resources. And if you look at this diagram on the left side, you have three people here looking at a soccer match. They all have equality in terms of the size of the box they can go on top of, but not everyone here can see the soccer match. Where on the right side of the diagram, It's more of equity here, where all three can actually watch a soccer match. We have inclusion, which refers to a variety of people of power of voice and decision-making authority. And the goal here is to create a sense of belonging that can foster fresh perspectives, creativity, and understanding. And apparently we have a classroom full of dinosaurs here, and we have the teacher, perhaps the professor on the left side, making a comment about poor T-Rex that I guess he just can't raise his arm any higher. So the inclusion here is that maybe T-Rex doesn't feel included with the rest of the class. And for anyone who is new to grant writing, this is a very holistic approach that I'm going to take within this presentation. It can be complex and highly technical. It does require a holistic understanding and explanation of an intervention and its target audience. And we think about an intervention, it could be program or services or some kind of innovative idea that you want to provide towards whoever your target is. The target audience could be a marginalized population. It could be underserved, children, for example. It could be people who have disabilities. It could even be the staff at your organization. So whoever your target is, that's where you're targeting towards. It often requires following a funder's evaluation rubric. For government agencies, they tend to use evaluation rubrics that you could follow based on a point scheme or point scoring for each section. And your narrative, in terms of your proposal, also serves to advocate for your target audience. So as a grant writer starts putting together their narrative, they're advocating for their target audience because they want the best for their target audience. In traditional speak, we have a grant writing process. It's linear and it's cyclical by nature. And it starts from the left side. We identify a need or a focus, and this is typically a community need. We then, based on those needs, we try to find grants that could help address those needs, and grants being funded. If we identified a grant that could be a good fit to meet that need, we then develop a general proposal and a budget to align with it. If that's not necessary, you may have to submit a letter of inquiry or a letter of intent known as an LOI. And if that is accepted, then you go to a second round where then you prepare your proposal. And then you submit your proposal before the deadline, because in grant writing, there's always deadlines. And when you submit it, the funder or the agency then accepts and reviews it. You can either get the yay and nay, where they received where you get a award letter stating that you received XYZ amount of money to do your originally proposed intervention, or you can get a declination by getting the thumbs down. If you were to receive the award, you then carry out the project. This is where your implementation plan comes into place and you start doing your activities. You also want to measure said intervention, which is included into this. And using that measurement in terms of program evaluation, you can then file reports with the funding agency to show how effective that program is, if it is effective at all, or what did you learn from it. So traditionally, this is what a grant writing process looks like that grant writers use. And of course, there's always common struggles for every grant writer. Whether you forgot to upload an attachment, which happens all the time, if you have 20 documents to upload into some kind of online portal, you may forget something, and so you always want to double check work no matter what. And of course, when you're working with deadlines, if you're working on 3 or 4 different applications, sometimes caffeine can be your best friend. Sometimes coffee can help you get to that deadline as well. So you need to recharge. So there's nothing new for if you're experiencing this at all, if you're experiencing that high level of stress, if you need the extra caffeine, you're not alone. So why is diversity inclusion important for grant writers? Well, let's look at it from the other side. Let's look from the funder's point of view, from the grant makers. Because you're allocating a resource to assist historically marginalized and underserved communities. And why are they doing this? To address historical disparities and reduce their biases, and to strengthen equitable resource distribution. They're hoping to also incorporate a systemic and transformational perspective. And the word transformational here refers to change. What is changing here?
Let me see.
It also helps a grant writer to reflect and understand their identity, positionality, and privilege. Now, amongst these 3 terms, I want you to really focus on this word positionality, because this is important here for knowing that your lived experiences, your beliefs, whether religious or moral beliefs that you may have, up to this point in day and time, what is your position as you're putting together a grant, or even if you're a fundraiser in general, where do you sit in terms of this whole grand scheme of things, in terms of raising money, raising funding for your organization? So as we move forward in this presentation, I always want you to reference that positionality of yourself. And a few self-reflection questions to ponder in terms of your positionality. How does my race, gender identity, and even your past life experiences affect your ability to put together a grant proposal? How does your motivation to be helpful interfere with your ability to receive funding for the community that you're working with? What are your current beliefs about addressing a need? And how does that impact your ability to listen and learn from the community? And then what is at the core writing for versus writing with? Again, so looking at positionality in terms of yourself, what would be your current thinking and awareness? Any marginalization and systemic oppression of a specific community or population. So we have one funder, let's say a foundation, that actually created a guide for grant makers. They're called Open Society Foundations. And this helps grant makers to incorporate and advance DEI. And this is a 40-page guide that they have in the website below on the very bottom. But some 3 examples that they provided in their guide. One being, explain why challenging structures of power and privilege are critical to your foundation and be transparent about your journey. Ask yourself questions to reflect on and to challenge your implicit biases. Or the 3rd example, tailor payment schedules according to grantee needs. Now, we know that with DEI, we have organizations out there that may have modest operating budgets or program budgets, especially grassroots organizations. They may have a really great idea or great intervention that could definitely help the community, but they may not have the funds to do it. So perhaps a payment schedule where they could advance funding for them to do that may be worthwhile. So the next few slides are going to be about examples of how funding agencies use DEI or potentially use diversity and inclusion in their RFAs, which is a request for application, or RFP, which is request for proposal, that grant writers apply to. So we have the New York State Department of Labor, their Excluded Workers Fund program. And this was back in July of 2021 to June 2022. And the purpose was to provide income assistance and various community supports to excluded workers that were not able to receive unemployment benefits or benefits assistance during COVID-19. And within their pertinent description in their RFP, they want to know, for the grant writer to explain this, describe how your organization has a cultural competency to have meaningful engagement with communities where it expects to work on this initiative. Now, I bolded and underlined the word cultural competency because you're probably thinking, okay, if I'm in, let's say, Westchester County, and how New York State Department of Labor defined excluded worker, a huge population, about, let's say 95% of the population who applied for benefits were immigrants, many of which were undocumented immigrants because they couldn't apply for unemployment benefits. So if you think cultural competency, you may think, okay, I may need, for my staff, I may structures around needing bilingual staff workers, coordination of resources. So when we think cultural competency, we want to define that. And as a grant writer, you have options here. You could either go along with this and say, you know what, I'm going to discuss how we have cultural competency amongst the organization staff that can meet this need. Or I can go beyond this. And what I mean by beyond is that because when we look at cultural competency, it's synonymous to cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness. It can be limited because it just means that you have an understanding of what the community may need. But then if you look back in terms of your staff, they always have to continue learning as well with this. So in a study in 2020 by Lekas, Paul, and Lewis, they wanted to talk about a paradigm shift from cultural competency to cultural humility, which refers to being willing to continue learning from the participants or the clients, or your target audience, or your organization's staff. It's community-oriented, it's participatory through openness to sharing power and being self-reflexive. So you could very well take a different approach. You can talk about cultural humility instead amongst your staff because they're willing to continue learning, to continue with the diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. So there's really no right or wrong way to do this. It's how the grant writer frames this. And potentially, sometimes even the funder, let's say the review staff at the New York City Department of Labor, who is working on that specific program, may take note of that. They may adopt it. They may just say, yeah, this was a really good idea, or they may just reject it. So as a grant writer, it's up to you to make that decision. You have the Walmart Foundation, in terms of local community grants. This is an online portal where they have an application process. And diversity and inclusion is one of 8 areas of funding. And the purpose of this is to foster building relationships and understanding among diverse groups in your local area. And within the application, they request demographics such as racial, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status of staff and board members. So this is some information that a grant writer have to collect together and then put into their online portal. You have the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, or OCFS, and their Family Opportunity Centers program. And the purpose here is to provide student mental health or school climate supports to school districts who are serving middle and junior high school students and their families. And within their program description, a grant writer have to fill out or answer these 2 bullet points. Describe how the staffing pattern for the proposed project is representative of the community, cultures, and languages of persons identified to receive services. Now, we may have an idea about community, and we already defined culture before. Now, we have language, though. And language is unique because you could, again, take that viewpoint as a grant writer and talk about how your staff are equipped to meet the languages of your community that you're serving, whether it's French, Spanish, pick a language. But you can also go, again, a step further, because we know if we want to do diversity, equity, and inclusion and infuse that into this, and the research is supporting this, language is closely related to social inclusion. So in a study in 2022 by Sedano, he found out there's a huge relationship between language use to social inclusion and technological inclusion among low-income immigrant mothers. So immigrants who don't feel included is because they just don't have the ability to speak in their native language to people who don't speak the same language. So they don't feel included. In a study in 2022 by Sharma et al., they found that bicultural bilingual caseworkers can help facilitate care for underserved populations by bridging them to the healthcare system. So even though language is important, we also focus on the outcome of this too, which is inclusion. And then by including the population that you want to serve, or your targeted population, it can lead to other outcomes such as increased self-efficacy, reduced depression, whatever you're focusing on. And then the second bullet point is discussing what activities will be conducted to instill diversity and cultural responsiveness in the project services. So this will have to be detailed as well. You have the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports, known as OASIS, and their Connections to Care program. And the purpose here is to support vulnerable and underserved populations through long-term substance use disorder recovery and overall well-being. And in their view, they want to know how applicants are expected to affirmatively address and advance justice and equity to create and enhance diversity and inclusive practices. We have something that's more local to us that we may know about, the Community Foundation of the Hudson Valley and their community grants. And their purpose is supporting organizations' ongoing administrative and infrastructure costs to provide support to maintain existing effective programs, development, and capacity building. And they're focused on benefiting people who are or have been historically marginalized and underfunded communities, populations, and based on various criteria from race, ethnicity, age, gender identity, socioeconomic status, and so on. You have the New York State Department of Health, also teamed up to Health Research Incorporated, and their goal is to focus populations who have been historically marginalized and unserved through community-based projects. And they give you a list of different populations that you can work with, that they want to be focused on. And then we have one more example from the New York State Department of State's Office of New Americans, from the Immigrant Resource Program. The purpose here is to support the integration of immigrants and refugees in New York State. And they use a resource navigation model through coordination and immigrant volunteers. And within their program description, how do immigrants in the proposed region, which are we proposing to, particularly underserved populations such as the LGBTQ plus immigrants, immigrants with developmental disabilities, older immigrants, and so on. How would they benefit, from your intervention, from the program that you were thinking about, proposing? And then describe your experience, the staff experience, conducting multilingual and culturally responsive outreach to the immigrant community. So these are some examples that funders expect to see from grant writers going in their proposals in terms of related to diversity and inclusion. Now, one example I like to pinpoint is you have the United Way Westchester Putnam, place where I'm situated. And you can find this on our website. We have an equity and inclusion policy commitment statement, and this is a very short version of it. And it's to improve the income, education, and health of every person in our community through valuing diversity, promoting equitable treatment, fostering inclusivity at all levels, and eliminating discrimination in all forms. This means that as an organization, we practice and breathe this, as well as our staff, internally and externally. The population that we target here is that we focus on low income and ALICE populations. ALICE meaning asset limited, income constrained, and employed. These are, it could be an individual or household who lives right above the poverty line, who may not be able to receive certain government assistance, and could be living paycheck to paycheck. At the United Way Westchester Putnam, we also have our internal DEI efforts. We have a staff-led and a board DEI committees. We have multiple cultural staff events and trainings, and we partake in the 5 and 21-day social justice and equity challenges. We also have external DEI efforts through our service that we provide, through programs and community partnerships that we work with. And out of our 33 staff, 66% are BIPOC, referring to Black, Indigenous, person of color, people of color. And out of 28 board members, 40% of our BIPOC as well. So diversity is huge. Our program services, just to get a quick idea of what they are, we have our Essential Goods for Basic Needs program, which we work with many grassroots organizations, cross-sector local organizations by providing capacity building and resources that go back into the community. We have our Education United program, which is funded through the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program, which is an after-school or out-of-school time academic enrichment, STEM youth development, and social emotional learning program, as long as with family engagement too. And about at least 80% of the students in this program for elementary school students are all low income. This is 100% of the students here are all low income, but 80% of them are Latinx or Hispanic, many of which come from immigrant families. We have Summer Learning Program, which provides weekly food parcels, school supplies, literacy kits, and backpacks. And this is in partnership with Feeding Westchester, DoorDash for doing deliveries, and numerous community hubs from schools to community centers to churches across Westchester and Putnam counties. We have a Ride United program, which is non-emergency round trip to medical appointments, school and work through Lyft. And then we do direct deliveries of food parcels and essential goods to households. We have our Hudson Valley Long Island 211 call center, which is AIRS accredited, means that's the Alliance of Information Referral Systems. It's a rigorous process they get accreditation for. This is a 24/7, 365-day service that is provided to the community for free. And it also goes across 12 New York State counties, including the Adirondacks. And their staff interprets and translates over 200 languages, including sign. And then we have our annual community impact grant, which supports local nonprofits serving needs of underprivileged, marginalized, or ALICE populations in Westchester and Putnam. And as we do focus is on health, economic stability, and education. And we also have our grassroots organizations. And they have a strong focus on collective action for creating change at the local, regional, national, and international levels. And grassroots efforts are conducted from a ground-up approach. They can either be public health or social action oriented. It's typically based on need. Whatever the community needs, they focus on it. And among many grassroots organizations, they are BIPOC led. However, they also have modest organizational budgets and resources, meaning that they can't afford to have a grant writer, or they don't have the capacity or training to do it, and they can't afford to hire one sometimes. So, referencing back to your positionality, if you are a grant writer or even a fundraiser, Now, how would you describe your positionality when working with grassroots organizations? And as we all may know, grassroots efforts can lead to huge movements, significant movements, because they do come from the ground up. And one such movement that I'm pretty sure all of us in here know about is the American Civil Rights Movement. And back in 1950s and 60s, it helped to abolish legalize racial segregation and discrimination. And in May of 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, which led to legally ending racial segregation in public schools and overruling the separate but equal principle. So it's important that grassroots organizations get the support they need, especially when it comes to grant writing. There's a certain level of advocacy too, because they may not know much about grant writing. They don't have the capacity for it, but they could definitely use the help on it. So we use theory now to structure a proposal. You may have a big grand scheme idea how you want to present your idea or intervention to a funder, but then we use theory to structure it. So how does theory align with diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, it serves as a roadmap for developing your argument. It follows a set of related assumptions explaining how an intervention works. It provides structure for the narrative and budget. And importantly, it's also testable. You can create metrics to test it. So the purpose of using theory is to structure how an intervention can be designed, implemented, and modified along the way, and then measured. But some questions in terms of your positionality as that grant writer fundraiser. Who is designing the intervention and for what purpose? Is it based on a community need? Or is it something that you just think is the best idea to do because you have some data to support it? What would be the implementation strategies used for your intervention? What would the staff look like? Are they representative of the community? Are they culturally responsive? How would you also develop the evaluation plan? Is it something you work together with the community, or is it something that you believe that you think would be best for the community based on your experience and expertise? So one conceptual framework that I'm pretty sure everyone heard about is the social determinants of health, also known as the social drivers of health. And what it does is that it helps explain how people live within certain conditions regarding health functioning and quality of life. And the United States Department of Health and Human Services provided 5 domains on this, from economic stability, educational access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, and social and community context. Now, you may have some kind of intervention in mind or some kind of program that you want to propose to a funder. If you could think back in how that would look, how would that fit into this conceptual framework? If you're providing service that can help increase the stability of a marginalized population in terms of financial support, what would that even look like? If you're working with families that have children, if you want to provide equitable access to education, what would that look like? And so on. So we're using this conceptual framework to help frame or structure what your intervention could be proposed to the funder. It provides that structure. It's like the glue. And a reflection here, how do you incorporate both the social determinants of health and DEI into a grant proposal? We have social capital theory, which strongly focuses on trust building relationships and reciprocity. And the purpose here is to have a set of shared values, resources that help individuals to work together for achieving a common goal. And there are 3 components of this. We have what we call bonding, bridging, and linking. So let's say for bonding, creating within group shared interests. So if I'm let's say if I'm a grant writer and I'm proposing to support immigrant populations, low-income immigrant populations who need support in educational access, I could think of, let's say for bonding social capital, let's say for students, it could be amongst their family members of peers. That's who they would get support from. Where bridging could be a cross-group shared interests. For a student, it could be their teacher or a nonprofit staff member, where they can access different kinds of resources compared to someone who's more close to you. And we're linking, where you're creating ties across groups that span different socioeconomic status groups, such as government resources. We're bonding social capital, you're closer to the person, you understand the person better in terms of getting that support. It could be your mother, father, brother, best friend, it could be someone who's close to you. But bridging could be more like an acquaintance or a work colleague, or it could be someone that you see on a usual basis, but you're not really close to that person. And linking is probably someone you never met or talked to, being an acquaintance. It could be someone sitting at the Department of Social Services, a social worker who provides support to a caseload of 500 different families. So in this case, in terms of reflection, how can power be explained between community-based staff and marginalized communities? And when we say power, is it relational power? Is it positional power? Is it power over, power to, or power with? So let's say we picture a community navigator providing resources or making referrals for a population needed support. And what would that power dynamic look like? So just something for a grant writer to articulate as they're putting together their proposal. They have critical race theory, which examines the intersectionality of race, class, national origin, and gender identity in society. And if you add disability and race, it becomes disparate. And in this theory, it talks about that race is not biological, but socially constructed. Racism is also a normal feature of society and is ingrained within systems and institutions. So like an institution could be the banking system, it could be education in schools, it could be in housing, in terms of redlining practices. And the focus here is on racial inequities, laws, and policies. Now you may see this in, terms of like a research paper, or you may see this in higher ed, but there's always a possibility that you may find a funder who really is strong in social justice, who really has a strong focus in on it. And perhaps this may be a theory that you could use to help frame your intervention, that you may want to help the community that you're serving. You have Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, which examines the interaction between individuals and their environments for understanding development, which leads to nurturing, encouraging environments leading to better outcomes. Now, the picture just shows like an example of some context here with a child being in the center, but this can change. You could change the context to whatever you like. But let's say if we have a child, for example, what's the outer circle that we should focus on next? Their family, their household. And then goes into their community in terms of friends and neighbors, and then outward to local environment, in terms of local government, parks, and so on. If you want to create into a conceptual framework here, where you have more than one theory, let's say 2 or more, you could even incorporate social capital into this. Now, what would be the child's social capital in terms of their bonding social capital, which is the next circle out, the immediate family members or their kinship informal networks, to bridging social capital, which goes to the next one, to schools and health service and so on, out to linking. So again, you can use this ecological model as another theory to help explain your intervention and how this weaves into DEI. And then one theory that we may be aware of is the theory of change. And this is all about making assumptions of how your intervention is supposed to work and the anticipated changes that would occur. So if you implement ABC, for example, you're going to observe X, Y, and Z. And then you want to identify goals, objectives, and desirable outcomes. And we can do that with logic models. It can help you visualize a theoretical change. In the bottom, we have a diagram that talks about the needs. Why is the intervention needed based on whatever community need it is, what a focus. Your participants, who is it for, and why we're doing this in the first place. Your intervention, how is it going to work? What are the participants going to be doing? And then your outcome. And what is the outcome that you expect to see? And why is it important that you reach that outcome? Here's one example of a logic model. You have to excuse me, I know it's small, but we will share the slides later. I want to include what we call the efficiency side on the left side, and on the right side, you have the effectiveness. Now, if you were to Google search a logic model, you're most likely to see the right side, which is the effectiveness. You'll probably see it horizontally from left to right, from inputs to outcomes. But I want you to put the efficiency side of this because it helps to explain how you get to the inputs, which are your resources in order to provide or implement the project that you have in mind. Now, I use the United Way's DI efforts the internal DI efforts as an example. And that content's not important here. It's really the logic that's important, the process of doing this. But if you have some kind of proposed intervention that you would like to discuss or show, because this is a communication tool for people to see, because if you have a proposed intervention that could take 10 pages to explain, sometimes a one page can help show that. So on the left side talks about efficiency. How are you going to get your staff or the organizational staff to have to be equipped or knowledgeable in order to provide or implement a specific project or program? You explain that process, which is the efficiency, which then leads to your resources, effectiveness. And from there, you talk about what resource do you need to implement the project? What are your objectives for doing it? Or what are your outputs? Meaning, like, what are the activities? And then what are your expected outcomes? What do you expect to see, let's say, 6 months from now or 1 year from now? They're like indicators or benchmarks. That tells you if you're on the right track or not. We have program evaluation, DEI. Just like what grassroots organizations don't have the resource for hiring, let's say, a grant writer, or don't have the capacity to do it sometimes, they don't have the resource for program evaluation as well to assess their programs and services. And they may not even have the training to do it. Typically, grant managers expect applicants and awardees to measure their proposed interventions. This is usually the case. They want to know if what you're doing is going to work or not. Not only for accountability, but it's always good. It's good practice to measure what you're doing, because if it's messing up along the way, you can find ways to try to correct it at least mid-course. And then data collection for historically underserved marginalized populations requires sensitivity and clear communication. And what we mean by that is that, we have in higher education, we have IRBs, institutional review boards. There is risk. Sometimes people don't like to be asked certain questions because they don't like the questions. So we have to be cognizant of something like this. And then we have community participatory approaches with respect to cultural language. Sometimes we have to provide surveys or do interviews with a translator or translated surveys in the language of the participant. And evaluation, most importantly, is not meant to be a gotcha moment or scenario. This is not a performance evaluation on staff. It measures the program holistically. It looks at why the program is effective, or if it's not, then what can be done to help it. Now, going back to your positionality as a grant writer fundraiser. Now, how would you articulate a specific program using a theoretical framework, if you're choosing? In what ways would you incorporate DEI to include all stakeholders, such as the target audience, organizations, or community members and staff? And if needed, how would the program evaluation be designed? And would you do it yourself based on what you found in terms of data? Or would you work with community members and community organizations and do some participatory approach that can help design that evaluation? And last but not least, we have a budget narrative. In terms of any grant application, you would ask for a budget. You would include your staff who are going to work in a project, personnel fringe costs. If there are staff that represent the community that can help meet the needs of the community in terms of being relatable, that's always a plus. You have program services regarding work schedules, recruitment, retention, and incentives. If you're providing service to a population that may very well be working 3 part-time jobs and are extremely busy, getting them to attend a program intervention that you believe that may be worthwhile their time may be really difficult to do. And there are also culturally and linguistically responsive approaches that you use, going back to doing consent form, to flyers, to marketing, to social outreach. There are also contractual costs to be aware of for minority women's-owned businesses. I could tell you for New York State agencies, let's say for the State Education Department, in their RFPs, they require a set aside to work with minority women's-owned businesses. And I believe that number is about 30%. So whatever your overall budget is, 30% of money they expect to go to minority women's-owned business, and for good reason. So something that you may want to add into it as well. And then any supplies, equipment, and then any indirect or administrative costs. And that's the presentation. What I'm doing is stop share right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's a lot of information. If I can see you guys, if you'd like to write any questions in the chat, we do have some, a little bit of time. Tia, or I hope I'm saying that right, says it's very interesting ideas and tools. So very good. I had a question, not to jump in here, but I was wondering, Jeff, if you suggest to organizations to sort of prep the logic model around their DEI work beforehand and just sort of tie it into all of their grant applications, or maybe just focus on the ones that are sort of highlighting that work, but maybe even under your not even your program description, just your organization description, and show like how strategically you would you suggest something like that?
I believe that's helpful. I think for the purpose of logic models to be a communication tool. If it helps to communicate what the organization is doing and how they focus on DEI within the organization externally too, and how that connects to the programs that they're doing, and I would say that's helpful. Then if you want to create a separate logic model for the programs by themselves, then that may be helpful as well. I mean, if you can fuse both together at the same time, that would be the most beneficial to do. So if you have, let's say, an education program, now what would diversity, equity, inclusion look like within that program? And you probably want to start, who is your target audience? What's the proposed intervention that you're doing, and how are you coming to the conclusion of wanting to do that intervention? Is it based on what you believe is the community need, or do you have data to support it? Are you meeting with community members to discuss what those needs are? And do you have community buy-in? So I think you have to take this holistic approach. And that logic model is often the case. It's a living, breathable document. And that can also be created along with the community members and other staff as well together. This is decided together.
Excellent. So it sounds like you're saying do it for every single program that you're working on, but also maybe do it, as your overall organization strategies around DEI work as well. So great. I love it. Jan, I see your hand is up. Jan Fisher.
So first of all, Jeff, thank you so much. This was really comprehensive, and you spoke about community input, and I think that is so important. I cut my teeth in grant writing. That's how I started many years ago. And when you were talking about community input, I think back to when I was at another organization, and as a white woman writing a grant about a community of color, it was Yonkers actually, and I brought the proposal to my supervisor at the time, and she called me back in her office a couple of days later, and she said, "This is a beautifully written proposal." I said, "But I will never submit this proposal." I said, "I want you to go back and read it as if you were the person or people that you are writing about, and see how you would feel if that's how people were writing about you." And I was really shocked. There was a lot of data that was supporting my work and, the whole thing. But what was really missing was a sensitivity and an understanding of the community. And I think that's such an important point. The community input, right, as you said, it's not just to please the funders. It's to really understand what the community needs are, what they want, and to foster that respect. And, as Tom did an amazing program for us with Maria Dautruche and some others, sort of that whole, you have a lot of power as a grant writer or as a fundraiser to communicate things in ways that are either harmful or helpful to the community that you're advocating for. And language is important and perspective is important. So thank you for making that point. And I just wanted to share my own, personal experience. I was so proud of this proposal, and then I'll never, ever forget that. And it really changed, my perspective on what I think. And I think it's really, really important.
Thank you, Jan, for sharing your story. I think that we all could learn from you. Absolutely. Marcy Girton Consulting says, Jeff, thanks so much. Very informative. I'm wondering if you might have some examples of language you might use in implementing one of the theories in your DEI response within the application, outside of theory of change / logic model. So within the narrative, it sounds like. Would you reference any of these theories to funders directly?
I do all the time. Now, if I'm putting together like a letter of intent where it's a 1 to 2 pager, I may not. I'm gonna take a step back. In grant writing, we tend to work on, options, and we may angle it based on because our audience is the funder, the review team of the funder who's going to say, okay, we like this grant, let's move on with this. You could try to elicit some kind of emotional response based on how well you can wordsmith your narrative. You could focus on that. You could focus on the intellectual side of things by, using theory and backing up with research and citing and explaining with statistics as to why this need is so important. You could do a combination of all three. All two, but that's option 3. And that's what I would normally do. In terms of language, yeah, like if I were picking social capital, it's going to be, let's say, let's say my population are immigrants. This is a population who has a large distrust for the government, because if you're undocumented, you're not likely want to be in public because you're afraid that you're going to get caught and deported. So a lot of language is going to go towards building trust. It's going to go towards building relationships. It's going to be about understanding the culture of immigrants because they're very well different from what we know. And then if you have a funder who wants you to talk about, let's say, assimilation, that may not be the best approach, because assimilating typically refers to accepting or adopting the dominant culture, where integration could mean that we want to learn about what your culture does, the values, beliefs, the foods you eat, the music you listen to. You may want to take a different approach. So within that framework, let's say social capital, it may already have verbiage or terminology that you could use. But it depends on the theory that you want to use, because, and I know this presentation, it really just scratched the surface. I didn't do it justice, let's say, by going to the theories, because time willing. But yeah, the research really supports, definitely for language use, let's say for social capital. It's important that we build those relationships with the community, especially as a grant writer. And it's important to know the research. And it's important for the funder to understand that, especially for a funder that may not be so focused on DEI, or who are learning, the viewers who are looking at your work, they may not be so aware of it. So when I go back to the example from the New York State Department of Labor, a lot of the terminology was all about cultural competency, meaning that it's limited. You get to a certain point where you talk about your staff, okay, they're competent, they understand, they're aware of what the community is like. But it's limited as to, okay, where do we go from here? Do they continue growing? Do they continue learning about the community when the demographics change? So it depends on your angle and how you want to approach it. There's really no right or wrong answer to it. It's just like another tool in the toolkit. Well, which one do you want to use? I hope that makes sense.
I love that, because I always teach anyone who, like my Vistas, who like to do, I give them each a grant proposal, but I teach them to go back and copy their exact language and make sure you're using the language that they're using. But you're right, we are, as grant professionals, we are given a little bit of power here. So let's show the state that, they should be using terms like humility and, not necessarily competency. So I love that. Let's get back a couple more, Jeff. I know we're getting short on time. I think another minute or two. So great presentation from Karen. Are you seeing funders more willing to cover the cost of evaluation, especially for smaller organizations with limited budgets? Good question.
So depending on the budget, typically an evaluation costs anywhere from 6 to 8% of the budget itself. That's usually the going number. If it's a $10,000 budget, I'm going to make this up. If it's a $10,000 budget, building $600, $800, it's hard to say. What you probably want to do is build an evaluation process in with the proposal, and typically funders do require it. And if they don't, it's best practice to actually do this. Because if you're going to get funded for a project, if you don't know if it's going to be working or not towards the later end of it, then really what's the purpose of doing it in the first place? This is not meant to be a feel-good kind of thing. Work with communities who really need the support. So you want to make sure what you're doing is working. But if you really are limited to budget, sometimes you can work with a program evaluator who is willing to build a capacity organization, especially for grassroots and smaller organizations. That may be beneficial too, because sometimes they are willing to do that.
Thank you. And then Deborah asked, do you have suggestions for grassroots orgs whose members are not representative of their community on how to attract members who are more representative of various groups in their community? So that's a loaded question, which likely takes a lot more than 30 seconds, but if you give us your quick thought.
I think there could be many responses to this one, but maybe like for like an event or something. It's kind of like a speed dating kind of thing where you have organizations coming together. We have grassroots organizations, some staff there together with large organizations, and where do they meet? Where do they align? I can picture many grassroots organizations who are working in the trenches or on the ground, who are underwater and just can't figure it out. They need the funding and they're just trying to make ends meet through their donors. They want to apply for a grant, but they don't have the skill sets to do it. And nor do they have the funding to hire a grant writer. So these are BIPOC-led organizations who have great ideas, great interventions, but just don't have much of a voice in the community, unfortunately.
Great. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of GPLH and ADO, thank you all so much for joining us today. I want to give a sincere thank you to Jeffrey for an amazing presentation. I found it very thoughtful, compelling information. Thank you so much, Jeff. Once again, we will be sharing the recording, slide deck, and a survey with all of you, and look forward to seeing you at our upcoming programs. February 8th, Connections Call for GPLH members, and March 7th, program on grant budgeting. Everyone have a great day, and I hope to see you soon. Happy New Year. Deb, you can stop the recording also.
All right, my internet actually froze, so I couldn't, but I will stop it now. Here we go.